Hi, I'm Betty Long, and welcome to the Lighting Your Way podcast. During Season 2, we are delving in deeper to the amazing lives and stories of nurses and other healthcare professionals from around the country. We will also be talking with a few of my nurse advocate colleagues at Guardian Nurses, and on occasion, even some real live patients. You'll get a behind-the-scenes peek at the healthcare system, as well as get advice on how to get the best care when you or a loved one is a patient. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, one death every 11 minutes. Contrary to popular belief, suicide rates are not higher at Christmas time. In fact, suicide rates are fairly consistent throughout the year. This myth may be perpetuated by popular culture, such as the all-time favorite Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Not only is this a myth, but to the contrary, some researchers claim that the holidays can lessen the chance of a suicide as people feel more connected to those around them. Regardless, I think we can all agree that the holidays can indeed be a stressful time. Loneliness, intensification of feelings of loss, financial hardships, family conflict, and substance misuse can increase during the holidays. In this episode, we talk with Jennifer Donahue and Stephen Mitchell, two of my colleagues here at Guardian Nurses. Stephen's expertise lies in mental health nursing, and Jen will share with us a story about a patient with whom she worked who tried to take their own life. Jennifer, Stephen, welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining me today on what, could be a more serious subject for our podcast.
Thanks, Betty, for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for talking about this.
Thank you both, really, for coming and for sharing your experiences. I appreciate so much that we're talking about mental health today, and specifically suicide. And as I said in my introduction, I was actually surprised to learn that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And when I think of all the medical illnesses that can kill us, I thought that was pretty significant. And in last year, more than 47,000 people took their own lives. But what it doesn't tell us is that a lot more people think about taking their own life, and a lot more people attempt taking their own life. So, Jen, I want to start with you. You, a few months ago, had a case in which your patient attempted to end their life by taking an overdose of medication. Can you tell us about that case?
Sure. I first met this patient about a year ago on a phone call, and since that time I've been helping them with multiple health issues. And we spoke fairly regularly on the phone. And if I didn't reach this patient, then I would always leave a message just reminding them that I'm always just a phone call away if they ever need assistance. About 2 months ago, I got a text from this patient while I was on an appointment with another one of my patients. And the text said, "Thank you for everything. I appreciate your help." Okay. So, I thought that maybe this was a text that was meant for someone else. So I didn't really think too much of it because it seemed sort of...
You hadn't been in touch during the time? It was just out of the blue?
Right, out of the blue. I had called a month prior and left a message and hadn't received a call back. And then I just got that text. So it seemed sort of out of place. And I thought, okay, well, maybe the patient meant to text someone else.
Okay.
But then an hour later, I received another text, and all it said was, "Do you help with suicide?"
Yikes.
So I immediately excused myself from my appointment. And I was texting back and asking if they were okay, if they were thinking of hurting themselves, and could we talk? And as the patient was responding, yes, I was already calling them.
Okay. Wow.
So
I can't imagine, right? Like that that the patient's texting. That's wow. Okay. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. So when I got them on the phone, they just thanked me for the help that I had been giving, for the assistance that I had been providing, but then admitted they were just done, said they were just tired of life and just wanted to die. And so I asked, where they were they home? And they did admit that, yes, they were home, and then admitted to overdosing on medication in an effort to kill themselves.
Wow.
So,
What had you been working with that patient about? Like, was it mental health issues, or was it a clinical medical issue?
A lot of musculoskeletal issues. The patient did have a history of depression, but was actively in counseling.
Okay.
And that wasn't one of the issues that we were dealing with. It seemed controlled, adherent with it, medications and receiving counseling. So it was more of musculoskeletal problems.
Okay, so back to your patient.
So I pleaded with them to please let me send help to their home. But the patient refused. And after a minute, thanked me again for everything they said, and then hung up the phone. So frantically, I called my vice president, Robin, right away, because I needed her help. I was at an appointment with another patient, so I didn't have my computer with me, which has all this patient's information, which I would need to give to the police. So I immediately called Robin, and thankfully she answered the phone right away. And I quickly explained the situation to her. And while she was dialing 911, this patient actually called me back. And it turns out they wanted to apologize for upsetting me. Because, of course, when I was begging them to let me send help, I was very upset. And, and the patient actually called me back. So I tried to keep them on the phone then. While at the same time, I was texting back and forth with Robin on my personal phone just to let her know that I had this patient on the phone, and she was texting back to let me know as the police were on their way, and I was letting her know when they arrived. So when they did arrive, I was, pleading with this patient to answer the door and accept the help, because they weren't going to do it. But fortunately, eventually, they did open the door and accepted the help, and were taken to the hospital.
Wow. That is amazing, Jen. I remember you calling Robin at headquarters that morning, and I just want to say you acted so quickly and so appropriately, and saved the patient's life. So tell us, if you can remember, what popped into your head when you first saw the patient's text?
I have to say, at first it was a little bit of confusion and almost like disbelief. But then at the same time, I just felt like such an urgency to just call and make sure that they were okay. I didn't want to overreact, but at the same time, I didn't want to not react and then have something awful happen.
Right.
So I called, and unfortunately, it was a text that really did need a real cry for help.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how is your patient doing now?
Doing very well right now. Receiving therapy, ongoing therapy, and support, back in several support groups. So right now, doing very well.
And are you in touch? Do you continue to support the patient?
Yep. It's interesting. As they were, I actually got a call while they were inpatient in the psych unit. I did get a voice message one day, just saying that they were doing well, and that they were, safe, and just wanted to let me know that they were okay, which was really nice.
Wow, that's great. And that they left a message. That's good.
Yep.
Because I'm sure if you saw the number coming up, well, it was probably a number from the hospital, so you wouldn't have recognized it.
Right. I didn't.
When you look back on that day, and I'm sure you do, what do you think about?
Immediately, there are times where I may start to try to think about what could have happened had I not answered the call or not made the call or had not, answered the text. But I try not to go down that road. I'm just so relieved that, the patient is safe. I'm so glad that they called and just so grateful that they felt that they could trust me.
Right. Well, that's a big,
for help.
I think that's a big thing. And I think Stephen will echo that as well. Jen, I know that for me and probably a lot of our listeners, losing someone that we know or love by taking their own lives is something, sadly, that we have experienced in our own lives. And as nurses, right. I think we lose patients all the time to medical issues, critical care, all that. Was this your first experience with someone who tried to take their own life?
No, unfortunately, it wasn't. In my 25 years of nursing, I've taken care of several patients that have attempted to take their lives. My very first experience with suicide was back when I was in high school. An 18-year-old classmate who seemed to have everything going for him, was, a star wrestler and had a great supportive family. He ended his life by jumping off a bridge. Oh. And then sadly, a month ago, a close friend of my son's took his life with a gun, and he was only 22. And then even closer to home, I experienced a family member of my own considering the thought of suicide.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Just been
that's a lot. That's a lot. Really. I mean, I think I've had probably maybe 2 or 3. Stephen, how about you? In your own personal life, have you had any folks that have tried to kill themselves?
Unfortunately, like Jen, yes. I've had very close friends of mine who have decided to do that, and then we've had a family member who, a long time ago, but decided that was the way that they wanted to end their life.
Wow. Well, Jen, but I think just as with any death, whether it's natural or not, we experience loss, right? Even we all do, whether we're nurses or not, and we grieve. But the feelings, I think, after someone takes their own life are pretty complex. Can you remember the feelings that you had after learning that your high school friend had taken his own life? I mean, you were his age, right? You're 18.
Right. Yep. I was 18. And I still remember to this day, because it was something that I hadn't ever experienced before in my life. Right. Someone choosing to end their life. I had only up to that point ever experienced the loss of a grandparent, which was, of course, very sad, but it was something that I could almost understand and something that seemed almost natural, right? But an 18-year-old choosing to end their life, I had a difficult time for a long time trying to, make sense of that. And I remember feeling sad, of course, but I remember too, after grieving for some time, just feeling really disappointed for him, for his family, for his friends, and then even feeling mad that he had hurt his family so badly. Right. His suffering was over, but for his family, they will suffer for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're younger than me, but even quote back then, what type of support was offered to you and your schoolmates?
The high school counselor was readily available if anyone needed, but for me and my group of friends at that time, we gravitated towards each other, and that's really what helped us through it was, pulling together as a group and being the support for each other.
Great. Yeah. There's strength in friendship.
Yep.
Stephen, let me ask you, in your work with our patients at Guardian Nurses, what has been your experience with your patients?
Yeah, When reflecting on doing this podcast with the two of you, I recently had an incident, a patient that, similar story to Jen, where I kind of hybrid and follow some of the complex medical patients, and same thing happened where kind of out of the blue, an incident happened at their work, and the conversation kind of took a very interesting turn. And at one point, it kind of came up very subtly. And I remember asking the patient, I need to ask you this question now. Have you had any thoughts to hurt yourself? And the answer was yes. And then I had to ask, well, do you have a plan? And they said, no. And I said, okay, I'm going to provide you a resource, and I want you to call them. And it was the National Suicide Hotline number. And they did, and they got connected with a mental health referral, which they followed up on. But it was interesting. Similar cases, Jen, where, we think we meet people open up to us that are trusted individuals and share these thoughts and feelings. And it kind of goes down a path where you kind of have to ask those questions.
Right. Yeah, like your spidey sense goes up, like, wait a minute, I think I should be asking something else.
Exactly.
I know in preparing for this, I did some research at the National Institute of Mental Health and on their website. And apparently they've developed an easy-to-use screening tool, mostly for healthcare providers, but it could be used for anybody because it's pretty easy to use and it's pretty quick. And what I was struck by is that in a study that used the screening tool, a yes response to one or more of the four questions identified 97% of youth who were aged 10 to 21 years at risk for suicide, which I thought was, it's pretty compelling study. Stephen, can you share with us those four questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is, in the past few weeks, have you wished that you were dead? Yes or no?
Oh, okay.
In the past few weeks, have you felt you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Yes or no? In the past week, have you had thoughts about killing yourself? Yes or no?
Okay.
And the last one, have you ever tried to kill yourself? Yes or no? And if so, how and when? If someone answers yes to any of the above questions, the next following acuity question needs to ask is, are you having thoughts of killing yourself right now? Yes or no? And if yes, please describe.
Okay. And then what? Right? If one of those is yes, what should someone do if someone they know is considering to take their own life?
The first thing is like noticing any warning signs of suicide, especially if there's a change in behavior, new behavior, concerning behaviors. Okay. Get help as soon as possible. Family, friends, they're usually often the first one to recognize the warning signs of suicide, and they can really take the first step forward in helping a loved one find mental health treatment. Okay. So if someone tells you they're going to kill themselves, don't leave them alone. Don't hang up the phone. The other thing is you do not promise that you will keep those suicidal thoughts a secret. You need to tell a trusted friend, family member, or other trusted adult.
Okay.
If it's call 911. If it's an emergency, a true medical or true immediate danger, go to the nearest emergency room.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, in a crisis, you can also contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The number is 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. And for Spanish, it's 1-888-628-9454. And
Great.
This lifeline is free. It's a confidential crisis line that's available to anyone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this lifeline actually connects people to their local crisis center that can provide them crisis counseling and mental health referrals.
Great.
The other one to remember is the crisis text line. And that's
so
text
wait,
hello.
There's a text line? Wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So if you feel like kind of in this similar situation that Jen had, that if someone, feels like they want to reach out in that communication venue, they text hello to 741741. And this crisis text line is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's also confidential and helps anyone in any type of crises, connecting them with crisis counselors who can then provide support and information.
Wow. I've often wanted, when I see those kind of 800 numbers, just because I'm curious, I want to try them out but I don't want to burden the system. I want to see if you can actually get somebody on the line, right? Because how many times have we heard about patients trying to get through to providers, right? And are on hold. Obviously, you don't want to be on hold on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But anyway, it's an aside. Stephen, do people threaten suicide to get attention? I think that's a kind of a myth, right?
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, suicidal thoughts and actions are a real sign of extreme distress and an indicator that someone truly needs help.
Yeah.
Talking about wanting to die by suicide is not a typical response to stress.
Right.
So all talk of suicide really should be taken very seriously and really requires immediate attention.
And what about, does asking someone about taking their own life put the idea in their head?
No, I mean, studies have shown that asking people about suicidal thoughts and behaviors does not cause an increase of such thoughts.
Yeah.
So asking someone directly, are you thinking of killing yourself or do you want to kill yourself, really is the best way to identify a risk for suicide.
Yeah, I know when we were talking earlier, it's interesting to me that when you do ask a patient or someone, that you know or love, it's such a serious question that their immediate answer will be honest, yes or no, right? So if they're not thinking about it, it would be no. So it's interesting to me. I know that for years, as a young nurse, I was tentative, right? You don't want to ask because you think, I don't want them to get this idea. But if they have the idea, they're going to have the idea. So,
right.
Who, when we look, I mean, we have a lot of people in our world, but who really is at risk for suicide?
Really, people of all ages, genders, ethnicities are at risk for suicide. Most people who have risk factors for suicide will not attempt suicide, and so it's difficult to tell who will act on suicidal thoughts. Right. Although risk factors for suicide are important to keep in mind, someone who is showing warning signs of suicide will be at higher risk of danger and need immediate attention.
Okay.
But there are some main risk factors.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, good. Great. What would they be?
So the main risk factors would include the following: someone who's had a history of suicide attempts, depression, other mental health disorders, substance use disorders, chronic pain, family history of mental disorder or substance use disorder, family history of suicide, exposure to family violence, including physical or sexual abuse, the presence of guns or firearms in the home, having been recently released from prison or jail, and exposure either directly or indirectly to others' suicidal behaviors, such as that of a family member, peers, or celebrities. Stressful life events such as the loss of a loved one, legal troubles, financial issues, and interpersonal stressors, such as shame, harassment, bullying, discrimination, relationship issues, they all can contribute to suicide risk, especially when they occur along with suicide risk factors.
Well, before we talk about the risk factors, let me just say, that feels like everybody. The list that you gave feels like everybody could be included in that, right? Chronic pain, family history. Wow, that's a lot. So, Jen, do you remember if your patient had any of those risk factors?
They did have a history of depression, but again, was receiving counseling for that, and a history of alcohol use as well, but had gone through, a 12-step program and was, enrolled with support groups. So risk factors, yes, but it wasn't something that was alarming at the time.
Right.
For the information that I knew, they were, getting help.
Right. So, Stephen, back to you. So the warning signs, right? So we've talked about risk factors, but talk about the warning signs of someone who's thinking about hurting themselves.
Yeah. So those would be, and thinking about it, someone talking about wanting to die or talking about wanting to kill themselves, someone talking about feeling empty or hopelessness or having no reason to live, talking about feeling trapped or feeling that there are no solutions, feeling this unbearable emotional or physical pain, talking about a burden to others, withdrawing from friends and family, giving away really important possessions, saying goodbye to friends and family that's kind of out of the blue, and then putting their affairs in order, such as making a will, a trust, or something along those lines.
Wow. Again, that is a powerful list. Anything else that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, just to keep adding to this and thinking about it, I mean, really is someone who's, if they're displaying extreme mood swings, they're suddenly changing from being very sad to be very calm or happy. They're making a plan or looking for ways to kill themselves, such as looking for lethal methods online. They're stockpiling medication or buying a gun. They're talking about feeling great guilt or shame, using alcohol and drugs way more often, acting anxious or getting agitated, or just showing rage or talking about seeking revenge.
Wow. So, yeah, one of the things that struck me is searching for lethal online methods. That would be, I'm sorry that those things exist online. Jen, let me ask you about your patient again. So you say you had been working with them for at least a year, and it was really musculoskeletal. Did they exhibit any of those behaviors that Stephen just mentioned to you?
No, nothing of that. No behaviors were referenced that were, very concerning. No actions or feelings that were very concerning. But at the time, but of course, after this cry for help,
right.
I learned that they were dealing with marital issues and financial concerns, and then of course, the stress of this pandemic too compounds these feelings as well.
Right.
So unfortunately, it wasn't something that that was discussed until this cry for help. Then I learned about all these other things that this patient was dealing with.
Right. Stephen, how about you? I mean, that patient, you said you've been talking with that patient for, working on some clinical medical issues, and then the conversations changed for you. Now, you're a mental health nurse, so your ears probably perked up. Was that obvious, would have been obvious to me or Jen as clinical nurses?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was, like I mentioned, it was something that, was out of the ordinary, not something that, there was something that was, I think there was you could hear an underlying sense of hopelessness for what had happened at their work. Okay. And it was something that was a very different change. I mean, it wasn't something I've ever heard them say. There was always kind of a solution oriented. So it was kind of a different, shift in the road, if you would say. And it was like, oh, I need to listen more carefully. And it just kind of naturally kind of came out.
Okay, good. I mean, so if I was talking to a patient, and again, that kind of turned, had I had a relationship with the patient for months, I probably would have picked up on it too, as would Jen, as probably all of our nurses on our team, I would think. Stephen, in the last several years, and this is a topic of great interest to me, there has been a lot of energy into better language around suicide, and I think in better language around healthcare in general. Top of mind to many who care about this is getting rid of the phrase committed suicide. And I think what I've read is that committing, suicide implies sin. When you commit something like a sin or a crime, right? It's bad, right? It's blaming. It's something bad. And I think the activists that I've read about suggest more objective phrasing, like died by suicide or died from suicide, ended their life or took their life. So if we're using the right language, if we're pulling negative connotations from the language, talking about suicide might be easier, right? So what do you say on this? What's been your experience with the language around suicide in your career as a mental health nurse?
Yeah, I mean, this has been of recently, we in mental health nursing or mental health in general have been talking about this. And like you mentioned, that word committed or completed, right. It implies, like you said, this like you mentioned, like a crime or something wrong and
Right.
a sin. And so we've really worked, death by suicide, or, they took their own life. And we're really trying to pull out that kind of, like what you were mentioning, that negative kind of, or labeling,
Okay.
and labeling someone as being negative. Like been thinking about it, like in the medical terms, we think of like, we don't call that person in this room that diabetic patient. We call them
Right.
Mr. Smith or Miss Jones. So
Okay.
it's in the kind of same framework that we're working with that and trying to pull out that, that trauma, and not so much the labeling, but really looking at the person and how we can help them. That it was not saying anymore that a not completed suicide, again, that implies that there was something negative here. We should look at them and treat them differently. No, that's the wrong language.
Right.
That the language is looking at the individual and how do we help them, move past this? What care do we need to put into place so that they know what to do if that happens again?
Okay. Yeah, and that's, I mean, certainly, Jen, in your life, you've had exposure to folks who have hurt themselves and tried to kill themselves, and then, of course, killed themselves. So it's,
Right.
are you, as a result of those experiences, are you more, I want to say, comfortable talking about suicide? Are you, tell me about, like, because obviously the more, none of us have had experience, we don't know what to say, right? But if we have,
Right.
maybe you've had some coaching.
I think most importantly, I think through this too, is you don't really have to worry about what to say. It just say something. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to, to dig a little deeper and ask someone if they're having bad thoughts or thinking of hurting themselves. It's not going to make the situation any worse, but
Right.
perhaps it could make the situation better. You could be
Right.
that lifeline that they need.
Yeah, you clearly
So
were
I'm
the
not
lifeline for your.
afraid.
Yeah, you clearly were the lifeline for your patient, and I give you a lot of credit and want to recognize how quickly you acted again, because that was pretty quick action on your part. To both of you, let me, before we end, Stephen, why don't you go first? What one thing would you like to share with our audience about this topic?
I think the one thing, and it's kind of the golden thread between both Jen and my stories, is that if you're, in that type of thinking or feeling, identifying someone that you trust and can open up to, whether that be a friend, a family member, a counselor, a nurse, a doctor, it doesn't matter who that is, and telling that person the importance of that. Because like in the instance of Jen, when they get that call, they get that text, exactly what Jen did, just reaching back out. And sometimes it's just hearing a human voice, that you're not alone, that someone is there. I think that is the biggest thing to take away, is whoever you trust, whoever that may be, letting them know that. So when that message comes across, that you're thinking this way, you're planning this way, and that you just need someone to kind of help you pull back into life, and really telling that person that you trust them to help, that they will do that for you, and letting them know the importance of that. So when that call, when that text happens, there is, exactly what Jen did, there's an outreach back.
Great advice. And as I heard you saying the call or the text, and then I thought about social media, right? When kids or folks post that on social media, which is sad to me, right? What a cry for help that is, to put it out on social media.
Right. Yeah.
Jen, how about you? What one thing would you like to share before we close?
I feel exactly the way Stephen feels too, that, there is help available. There's always a better solution than ending your life. So, to reach out and just ask for help, and be aware of, friends and family that may be in need of maybe your help as well, to get them the support that they need. I always remember, sadly, Robin Williams saying, and I think it's so true, suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems.
Wow. Yeah.
I just, keep in mind that there is help out there. Please just seek help if you're having, any depressed thoughts or considering hurting yourself. There's someone out there for you that can help.
That's great. Yeah, and that's sad about Robin Williams too, because that was a permanent solution.
Yeah.
Thank you, really, both Jen and Stephen, so much for joining me and for sharing your experiences and your expertise. And to our listeners, I hope that you learned something that will be helpful to you and the people you care about. Remember to take time this holiday season to be mindful of your own mental health. Remember to do the things you love and stay connected. Take care. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thank you.
Betty.
If you have any questions that you would like us to address in a future episode, please email us at podcast@guardiannurses.com. That email again is podcast@guardiannurses.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us this week. You can find the Lighting Your Way podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, YouTube, Spotify, and Stitcher. If you liked what you heard, tell a friend and leave us a review. You can learn all about Guardian Nurses Healthcare Advocates on our website, guardiannurses.com. So until next time, find some joy in your life, pet all the good doggies and kitties, and remember to tell your people that you love them. Take care.